Always when we have these times, I just want to thank you for just the reality and understanding that you have given us a story, that we have a past that goes before you, and yet you have this way of intervening in revealing yourself and giving us new life and a new direction and a new story. And so we want to, Christian and I both want to take this evening to share our God story and pray that you would receive all of the glory for it, because it's actually your story. And so we give you this time and pray that it would please and glorify you in your Son's name. Amen. I don't know that I can do this without saying, let's turn our Bibles to whatever the passage would be, but I just want to start off again. And see, here's the thing. We kind of know each other's stories, so I will be asking questions to a large degree of things that we know the answers to, but then on the other side of that, we'll know when the other one's lying too. So there'll be that. But I just let's start off, Christian, and just kind of give us a little bit about your beginning.
Yeah. So I'm actually going to start off, if you want to open your Bibles too. I'm going to start off with everyone's testimony, and this is coming from Ephesians chapter 2, okay? And you, who were dead in the trespasses and sins in which you once walked, followed the course of this world, following the prince of the power of the air, the spirit that is now at work in the sons of disobedience, among whom we all once lived in the passions of our flesh, carrying out the desires of the body and the mind, and were by nature children of wrath like the rest of mankind. But God, being rich in mercy, because of the great love with which he loved us, even when we were dead in our trespasses, made us alive together with Christ. By grace you have been saved, and raised us up with him, and seated us with him in the heavenly places in Christ Jesus, so that in the coming ages he might show the immeasurable riches of his grace in kindness towards us in Christ Jesus. For by grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not of your own doing, it is the gift of God, not a result of works, so that no one may boast. For we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them. That is everybody's testimony in this whole room. And that's the place where God had me come to this for tonight, because tonight I really wanted to do the testimony different than how I normally had done it. Quick nutshell, you guys basically know my backstory. I'm from New York. I'm Italian with a Roman Catholic background, and I was an atheist. But we're going to go back to Ephesians 2 for some of this like backstory, some of the context and everything. Here is the thing that you guys may not know so much about me. I've got two older sisters, 9 years older and 11 years older. My mother had 2 miscarriages before me. They did not expect to have me. When I was born, I almost didn't make it. I was born not breathing. Umbilical cord was wrapped around my neck. They thought they were going to lose, after the 2 miscarriages, their third son. They did not. And so their whole world was me. And because of that, I kind of got spoiled a bit when I was a kid. And my parents started to deal with some of those consequences. My sister, a quote from my sister that she said a long time ago, "You were the worst. You made me never want to have children." I was seriously, seriously bad. Very, very much the worst. And in our family, we had a strong kind of relationship with each other. There wasn't a lot of "I love you." You kind of just knew it and expected it and everything. So we weren't too close in that sense. But I was so destructive. I was so self-centered. one of my earliest memories, I don't know if I was 4 years old or 5 or something like that, but was lying and stealing in the same exact event. Um, I I was very, very bad. So another thing about me that I'm going to just really try to gently describe this. I was dark in ways that children shouldn't necessarily be. Another really early memory that I had, we had a dog that I loved this dog, but I literally would torture this dog. Like, for example, the dog would run away from me because it knew I was going to hurt it. And I would grab it by its hair and pull it out from under the couch. I would put it in a pillowcase and throw it down the stairs. And things like that I did, it just didn't really like make sense. I was doing things that were dark and just genuinely really evil. And it was my family dog. It was other pets. And those were kind of big things. I used to kill neighborhood animals, but insects was the big one. Like that every day, just in my own time when I was a little kid, I used to just go out and I used to just do everything I could, not just like necessarily just a little boy, just being a little boy, but I was actually trying to cause harm in the most painful, torturous kind of ways possible. It really genuinely was not good. There were things that were going on in my mind or my heart where I was gaining satisfaction from the torture and demise of other things. And this began to play out in other ways. So that's a little bit of context for me. And also what you guys may pick up on is I'm going to try to give you guys the 20-ish minute version. I'm not promising that, but that's what I'm kind of going for. So I'm not going to be including, just crazy amounts of details on things. But as far as my family's relationship with God and our culture with God, like I said, we were Roman Catholic, but in this religion, I don't want to just, I do not intend to just trash religions and everything like that. I will just simply say this. In our culture of this, we did not have a closeness with God. He was not near to us. This was not a God with hands that embraced us and with feet that came near to us and with ears to hear and with words of comfort and a heart that was a father to us. And so God was very distant and mythical to me personally. We went Easter, we went Christmas, but because of the trouble that I was getting into with school, they had to pull me out of public school by second grade and put me into a Catholic school because I was getting into too much trouble already in public school. So I think, in a nutshell, that kind of gives some context to where I was and where religion was for me, at least at a really young age.
Within that, what would you say? I mean, okay, so you guys were creasters. I mean, you're not necessarily getting a whole lot of catechism that way. Mm-hmm. What would you say was your understanding of God as you were growing up?
So here, I got a lot of the right answers, especially in Catholic school. But here was the issue. I was hearing all the right answers from everything from our teachers, and honestly, some of my teachers were nuns over the years, to the students, and I was a terrible student. There were a lot of much better students. Pretty much every student was a better student than me. And they all had the right answers about God. And no one that I saw and knew had the right life in regards to what they were saying about God. So I started to become disenfranchised with everything regarding God once things got a little bit older. So
at what point would you say that you went from, this kid being sent to parochial school and being taught about God and the church to becoming an atheist? When was that?
So now we get to the sons of disobedience part of Ephesians chapter 2. I was a when I was a senior, I started half the year at 16, and I graduated at 17 years old. So I was young for my age in school. In 5th grade, I was 9 years old, and I'm telling you, I remember this so crazy vividly. 5th grade was when I started my mind full time, just checking out at school and just thinking. There's just not an easier way to put this. Thinking about mass murder at my school every single day, all day long at school. I was not interested in what they were teaching. I just hated. I cursed Adam. I was like, darn you and that fruit, because I hate algebra and I hate the writing classes, and I hate school so much. Because remember, I was a very self-centered person, and the things that did not make me happy were a huge conflict in my life. I was really immature. And so from 9th grade, it went really dark, and I'm thinking about mass murder in my school all day long. When I was 10 years old in 6th grade, this is when, and I didn't even know thoughts of suicide existed. I was a young kid, and nobody talked about these things. That's when I started thinking about those things. In fact,
I don't want to take you too far away from mass murder, but tell me how did you blame Adam for algebra? What was that
oh my
connection?
gosh, if he didn't eat that, there was no algebra.
I got you.
Yeah.
Because
There's no homework.
Susan had 2 apples. Okay, I got it.
So by 10th grade, it shifts from the same thoughts I was having then. In addition to that, that's when suicide started becoming a thing. In fact, my older sister, found out, and she had some compassion towards me, and she said, "Do you think you're the first person who's ever thought that?" And I thought, yeah. Like, I didn't know other people ever thought that. I thought I was kind of broken in a sense, and my mind was different than everybody, and I couldn't even talk about it. So 6th grade was when that happened. And 6th grade was also the start of 2 thoughts that began that journey into atheism. The first thought was I was learning things in my science classes that were a contradiction to my religion classes. And I was like, how can the world be that old if in religion classes we're learning it's not that old? And so I had a problem with the Big Bang Theory and things that we were learning in that class that seemed to begin to shift and take the whole foundation, just getting it ready, just to come undone. And then the second thing, I was asking a teacher in class, I think my Bible has an error because it's saying this person is hundreds of years old. And she said, don't worry about that. And when she said that, it made me think, well, how much don't I need to worry about in this book? And I don't think these were their intentions, right? Like, this is not. Mm-hmm. But then by the time we got to 7th grade, I was 11 years old. And if I'm being really honest, my atheism was not because I had finished studying everything that ever existed in regards to God. I had come to the place where I said, if you are what I'm being taught you are, which is all powerful and all loving and all of these things, but my life is like this, and my thoughts are like this, and my world is like this, then this has to be your fault. And I'm done with you if that's the case. So I was mad at God, and I went from, instead of being a believer or saying, I don't understand God, because I was done with not understanding, that was going on for years, I was just done. So at 11 years old, it's so important for me to emphasize the age, because very likely that's younger than almost anybody in this room. And when we think about 9-year-olds, we don't think about 9-year-olds thinking the things that I was talking about. And so it's really important that sometimes it's amazing what happens at ages and how far the enemy can get a foothold in some of these things. And also, I want you guys to think, like, I had friends who were older than me, and I was always trying to impress them, but I'm not going to say that they were a bad influence on me, and that's why I became a bad kid. I was darker than these really worldly kids that were older than me, and I was darker than, like, the stuff I was watching on TV and everything. So there was a tremendous amount of corruption that was going on in my heart. The only way I can describe it is I was seriously demonically oppressed. And so that led to 7th grade, flat out, I'm done with you, really, really hating God.
Yeah, it always kind of tends to amaze me when people get mad at God, and the way they take their anger out on him isn't by not believing in him, and as though that would fix the problem. Um, so, um, so you go from 5th grade, 6th grade-ish, saying there is no God, and I mean, did you continue down that same downward spiral, or what happened?
Okay, so it gets worse before it gets better. This is only 7th grade. The worst was 9th grade. 8th grade was bad. 8th grade, this epitomizes the year for me. I failed 8th grade. I had to go to summer school. At the graduation ceremony, I had a fake diploma, right? Like my parents got to be there and they got to see me with the other graduates, but it was fake, right? I also had confirmation that year, and the confirmation was the same thing. It was a sham. I didn't believe in God. It was just part of the curriculum, and I was just going through the motions, probably what seemed like everybody else. 9th grade, I'm at a new school. I've got older friends to impress. Did I mention I'm a liar and a thief and all these other things? So I committed grand larceny and got busted with it. I was no stranger to illegal activity, seriously no stranger to it. But this time I got in trouble. I was in so much trouble. I can't get into all the discipline I had growing up. Punishment's a better word. I was in so much trouble, my parents were like, you're not even grounded. Like, we don't know what to do with you anymore. And that's when I ended up going to boarding school, or that was the course to it. Before we get to that, though, that when I got busted with grand larceny, I was just like, okay, this is about it. I had been hearing for years, like, you're gonna end up in jail. You're gonna live your life in jail if you don't change things. And nothing was changing. It was just getting worse. That year was suicide. That was it. And I had been dreaming about this for so long, seriously, since 7th grade. And I was really ready to go forward and do this. And I was also so excited about the whole thing that I had been leading up to for all these years that I was ready to take my time and enjoy the whole thing. And as I started doing this, right, I want you guys to understand, there was no fear here on my part. I was finally, like, I was at the finish line of which I had, like, been dreaming, like these sadistic, horrific, dark dreams. When I got to this place, I wanted to take my time with it, but then all of a sudden this thought came that I had never thought ever before. Give it one more day and just enjoy one more day. And I thought, okay, I could come right back to this tomorrow, but I'm just going to live one day without a care in the entire world. I'm not going to care about algebra. I'm not going to care about kids in school. I'm not going to care about bullies. I'm not going to care about anything. I'm just going to go and just have fun and just be free for this next day. This is where Ephesians chapter 2, verse 4 comes in. This is the but God part. Being rich in mercy because of the great love with which he loved us. So I don't know why, except for that verse. God broke something that day. Whatever had been going on since before 5th grade, I never ever came back to those thoughts. They never had a hold on my life ever again. I was never, ever suicidal ever again. I never, like the next day, I didn't go back to my room and go back where I left off with the knife and everything. I never went back to it. In fact, it was the first day of my freedom. I didn't realize it. I kept on thinking I'm not going to make it to the end of my freshman year. I didn't realize how far this freedom was going to go. But in looking back on it, this was a place where I would now say that God said, that's as far as that's ever going to go. You know, we came right to the brink, right to the breaking point of life. And God was in the business of protecting me before I was ever his in my mind or in my heart or anything like that. He stopped that day. And without me understanding all of that, he just held it all at bay for all of the rest of the years that I would continue hating him and cursing him and everything else, which at this point I'm 13, and I didn't become a Christian for another 7 years. So this is him just saying, that's as far as that's going to go. And then we'll just deal with the rest at a later time. So here's where it gets kind of complicated and interesting at the same time. When I started my new life at the boarding school, with this, these years before this, that was dark, but these years were much different. It was without the darkness and oppression. I would almost describe it as light in comparison. I had morals when I went to this boarding school. I had a new life with a fresh start and everything. So I wasn't going to lie anymore. I wasn't going to steal anymore. I was actually going to try to apply myself in ways I never had before. I had scholarships for sports at the school and everything, and I just felt a little bit of a difference. So I started making something of myself. By the time I graduated at that school, keep in mind, I'm an atheist, but by the time I graduated at that school, I was the president of the student body. I was the captain of every one of my sports teams. I was on honor society. I was a disciplined person, and I was very focused on others. I cared deeply about other people. Those 5 years between 9 and 14, I was so caught up in my own death that I wasn't thinking about anybody else. But then after I was free from that, I was looking around and going, man, I know that look on that person's face, and I want to help that person. So I spent my latter years as an atheist very focused on other people, wanting to love them, wanting to give them, support and counsel and things like that. And this would go on for all of those years. I was really living much more in the light. I was pretty successful in New York. And the best way I can describe this and kind of segue to moving past all this, my wife, her quote was, "You were the last person I ever thought would become a Christian because you didn't need God." Right? She was so used to people having been strung out or flat on their back in the world, and I was really living very successfully. I was living the life that I wanted to live, when and how I wanted to live it. And so there was no, it wasn't the same story. That's all I can tell you. It just wasn't the same story as a lot of common stories where they find God at a salvific point like that.
There are a lot of people, though, that go through life believing that being good is good enough, and they delude themselves into this kind of a thing like this is the wonderful life because I'm a good person. How did you go from that stage to understanding that you're not and that you needed something that you didn't at that point even believe in?
So this is one of the reasons why I really like doing testimonies, and this is why I'm always eager to hear, because people think that a lot of testimonies are pretty cookie cutter. I was in VBS, or I was at church camp, or I was in fill in the blank. My story of what God did is something I would like to hear more of, like from other people, because it's so unorthodox. I didn't get saved at a Billy Graham crusade. My salvation came in the midst of my life, how I want to live it and everything. I had been coming to Calvary. I stopped coming to Calvary. I was calling other Calvary chapels. I was telling somebody this earlier today. I was like, hey, my girlfriend's pregnant, and I am not a Christian, and there's this verse about being unequally yoked. Did you agree with that? And I called, I don't even know, I think it was around 30 Calvary chapels, coast to coast, and they all had the same answer, and I wasn't expecting that. So I'm not doing very well in terms with coming to terms with God, and especially with the church. The church and I are not on friendly terms at this point. So Matthew 4:18, it says, "And Jesus, walking by the Sea of Galilee, saw two brothers, Simon called Peter and Andrew his brother, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen." This is not the first meeting that Jesus had with Simon Peter. He had already met him. But Peter wasn't a fisher of men. Peter wasn't following Jesus at this point. Jesus goes and meets Peter where he's at. And this is exactly what God did with me. I ended up reading a book that was written by an atheist who never converted, who still had that stance and that position in regards to God. And chapter by chapter, I don't even, I'm not a person who would just tear into a book. I read that whole book in one day, and I gave my life to Christ by the end of that book. It was not anything orthodox. It was not a track. It wasn't a service. It wasn't a sermon. It wasn't a Billy Graham thing. It was God meeting me where I was at. And this is the God that I really am, like when I was praying about this and what, God, what do you want me to share in your story and how you do things? And there are so many unique things in the way that my story is different, the way that God worked differently towards his son. Like I always thought like I hated God. And God was always like, you're my son. And I'm protecting you and I'm looking out for you. And I'm going to meet you where you're at because this is the only way that I was going to hear anything. I wasn't hearing anything in any other way. So when my walls were down, and I'm reading this book by an atheist, I knew exactly where he was going from chapter 1, but I was in. Okay, you're making some great points here that tied in the truth of the Word of God in a strange way that I never expected. And I just kept on following and kept on following. Because if it was coming from Pastor Ken or one of you guys, I never would have believed it. I never would have accepted it because I'd already heard this stuff before. But because it was coming from someone that was a different source in a different way, I was like, hey, we're on the same team, right? Like, you're telling me this? And this is working out scientifically in the way that I understand and appreciate science and fact in a secular sense. And so that is what the Lord used to lead me to him just in one fell swoop in a single day.
And
So that's my 20 minutes, kind of. Here's what I want to say with this, though, right? This is what I was talking about. I viewed God as the enemy, and I was always going to be his son. I didn't know that, but he knew that. Eternally, I was his son. And that's the way that God moved and operated in my life. God's eternal. He's outside of time, right? And in my very finite life, like there was a day that I didn't think I was going to make it out of my bedroom alive, right? Never knowing that in this big, great, giant picture that God has, this plan and this journey that he has for my life, I was already his son, and he was going to do what was necessary to protect me and carry me and see through the end of those verses I read, right? Because I read those verses from 1 through, I think, verse 10 in chapter 2. There's so much to every single person's story in those verses. I had not gotten to the place of his workmanship yet, right? And he needed to hit pause on some of those things to get me there. I blame God for everything while he was on his mission to rescue me. I hated God, and he never hated me back. And, something I've shared with the youth before is every time I slung a profanity at him or gave God all kinds of gestures that were vulgar, it was never something that God ever held against me. It was something I was already forgiven for. And he was just waiting for me with his love, with his grace, and with his patience. I was thinking too small. And God's plan for my salvation was eternal. It was way bigger than anything I had ever known or would know. And so I don't even view now, in the age I'm at now, I don't view those years and those ages like I wasn't God's son. Like my identity as an atheist is so secularly minded because I was always his son. I was always going to be his son. I just didn't realize it at that point. But the way that he loved and acted towards me always was that way.
well, not so fast. Before we wrap up his part, there's a couple of details that he left out, and most of you probably know them, but just to fill them in for context. When he said that he quit going to Calvary Chapel, and and that he was calling around he had this job where his job was talking on the telephone. I know that's hard for some of you to believe that he would have a job like that, but that was his job, basically. And the reason why he quit coming to Calvary Chapel is because the pastor's daughter was pregnant by him, and so there was this kind of a pretty big riff right here. And but after this moment of him coming to the place of brokenness with Jesus, he came back to the church, and we all came over to our house afterwards, and he made the pledge to me that he apologized for what all had happened, and then made the pledge that he wanted to spend the rest of his life showing me how much he meant that apology. And so that was some almost 23 years ago. So there's that. Now you can clap, and then we'll ask for see if anybody has questions.
Questions? I think you guys know I left a lot of details out and everything, so yeah.
So Jerry's question is, we got to do this for the people that are on the live stream or out in the foyer. I always forget to do this, but his question is, what is your definition of an atheist?
Super great question. So not being prepared, I'm just gonna wing this one. My definition of an atheist is a person who has a problem with God. And okay, so here's how this works. People hear that I'm an atheist and everything, or was, and they're like, hey, can you talk to so-and-so that I know or am friends with, coworker, family member, something. And they think I'm going to come like I'm Josh McDowell with like, a whole bunch of apologetics and everything like that. And here's what I just do with them. Hey, I'm here. Tell me your story with God. And they always do. They always do. And so here's the thing. There was a part of me that believed intellectually that this is all a farce, right? That's hocus pocus. And then there was the soul of me that was always at enmity with God, never not, right? So I had this duality going on where I was like, no, like you're not real. But then I hate you so much, I can't stop telling you how much I hate you. So honestly, I would say atheism is essentially impossible by the actual definitions of what it is, right? Because you would have to have investigated and come to the place of knowing objectively that there is no God. Not possible. I would say atheism is really a position of personal and realized enmity with God. That's what I think it actually comes down to. Good question.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
I don't think we ever heard him say that he was a Bible-believing Christian.
Okay, great questions. I should have put this in the precursor. First question is, what was the book? And the answer to that is always the same. I never share the book.
It's not a good book.
Yeah.
So I didn't want to promote it.
I could not, I will never stop praising God for how he used it. But I don't think it would ever be used the same, right, in another situation. So I never get into the book. I got a better book I could tell you about. The family question. Oh. So I was 20, and it already broke my family's heart, especially my grandparents, when I said I was an atheist. That was bad. My parents, I was like putting them in an early grave, the way I was living and everything. It was so bad. And so after I became a Christian, I was pretty radical right off the start. Truth was extremely, and still is extremely, like at top of my list of importance. So after I became a Christian, I made some major mistakes with my family, and I came at them really hard, double barrel, with everything that I felt was wrong with how I was raised. Not necessarily their parenting, but the religion that I was raised with. I'm still having to carefully walk that back 20-something years later with my family, because I'm trying to have some serious progress with them in some areas. And so I'm still walking some of that back with tremendous humility now. So I was coming at them, not so much them coming at me. I will tell you this, the very first time I walked into a Calvary Chapel, it was the Asbury building, so it was extra weird. I could not explain to you, you're an East Coaster, so maybe you get some of this. But when I first walked into that Calvary Chapel, I was like, oh, this is the kind of place where there's snakes. They've got snakes that, like, it was creepy, Plus, it was also like just 2000, and Calvary Chapel, as far as like the style and everything like that, it's a few years back. So it was a little bit more like 1987 Mardell. It wasn't even like up to the year 2000 yet. And so I was way weirded out. And then when I saw the drums, I'm telling you, I was really sure there were snakes like under the pulpit. And so then after I became a Christian, I was like, I know that those people take the word of God really seriously. And I know where I came from. That was one of the problems. I'm going there. And I just like kind of a little bit of a Ruth experience for me on that one.
Any others?
Corey.
Girls first.
Mhm. I would, there's no history of anything like that in my family. My family, not into any occult kind of things or anything like that. I would say, honestly, I was just crazy self-centered. And, and my joy and happiness in life came from satisfaction. And when I was forced, especially school, when I was forced for so many hours to be in something that I really hated, and it's not just academics either. I had major problems with the other students too. It just was this pressure cooker that by the time I got to fifth grade, because this wasn't my first year, by the time I got to that year, I was at a breaking point as a 9-year-old kid. And also, keep in mind, like, we're not really good communicators, and like people weren't reaching out to talk to me to find out what was going on and everything. And also full circle with that. That's why after I became a Christian, that's why I've been about young people, like my whole Christian life, because I mean, like Romans 8:28, and especially Genesis 50:20, where Joseph says, "You meant this for evil, but God meant this for good, the saving of many lives to this day." I don't regret anything that I went through and that He protected me from, and I survived. I don't regret anything because it's been 20 plus years of ministry that He's used it for.
Okay.
Yeah.
Theodore.
I don't think, honestly, that they failed in any of those things. I remember when I was a little kid being in VBS. I remember learning the stories. I remember doing the paintings. I don't think that there was any lack of information. And I also would say I don't know a single person who was alive in the Spirit. And this isn't for criticism. It's just, I never saw the real thing. I never saw a person who believed it really. I just saw people who believed it culturally. And honestly, like if the culture is a certain standard, that is going to seriously affect the degree in which a person walks out and lives out their faith. Like it has to be a supernatural thing by the Holy Spirit in order to take a person so much further than the limitation of the ceiling of their peers around them and or the religious system around them. But I don't think, honestly, that between the religious classes and everything else I was in on a weekly basis, including going to Mass fairly often. Once I was in the Catholic Church, I was not going for Christmas and Easter. We were going way more often for all the holy days and stuff. It just went nowhere with me. Theodore.
Okay, real quick, because he's already cringed on my time. Okay. I just received a text reminding me to repeat the questions for the sake of. So the first question he asked was, did you feel like the Catholic Church failed in any way, or was it just all ritual, which you answered? And so this question is, how would you advise a Catholic to reach out or reach out to Catholics? Okay.
Oh, okay. So honestly, I think trying this is the same thing with the Catholic or anyone that has not come to that place of relationship in with the Lord. I came to a place of total, complete surrender, right? And He was going to be my Lord for the first time in my life, not by name or by understanding a title, but He was really going to be my Lord. And I don't think anything is different for anyone, whether it's a person who is an atheist or a person who is a Catholic or a Methodist or a person who's Jewish or anything. It does come down to the lordship of Jesus Christ and the transformation in life that He alone can bring to a person. Not a Sunday school teacher, not anything else. And the way that I pursued His word to know Him and to be obedient to Him and to understand Him. That was a game changer for me. And I know a number of Catholics who do read their Bible, and they have a completely different kind of faith than anything I knew when I was a kid.
Okay.
Gone.
Yeah, you almost did it in 20 minutes.
Hey, I think 24 is where I was at. All right, Pastor Ken, you want to pray or are you ready to roll?
I'm ready.
Okay.
Let's do it.
Where do you want to start? What do you want to start? Do you want to give us your backstory as to
Sure.
context with family
Sure.
and everything?
Yeah, I was born in California, Central California, which sounds really romantic, but it was Stockton, not romantic. It's where, if you ever saw the Grapes of Wrath, when all the Okies got in and left the Dust Bowl to go to California, that's where they settled. And but we moved here when I was real little, or Wichita is where I grew up. My dad was from California. They got divorced when I was real little. I have very few memories of him. And he moved back to California, and I never saw him again after the divorce. He was an alcoholic, and just most of my memories were somewhere associated with that, and not good. And my mom remarried when I was about 8, and she married a guy who my stepdad was, I guess you could say, a functional alcoholic. Went to work every day, but would start drinking beer from the moment he got off until he passed out at night, and then he would repeat it. And then on weekends, I never saw him. So
Did I miss when you said you left California?
Yeah, I was little. I was real little. Hardly any memories of it. 3 or 4.
And then Wichita?
Yeah. And
hold on. Quick question
okay.
about the parents' situation. Because when I was growing up, where I grew up, there were so few divorces. So was your situation in any way unique where you were growing up?
Yeah, I mean, growing up in the 50s, divorce was not common, and so it was. I can remember telling some neighbor kids when they asked me where my dad was. I was born in 1951, and but they asked me where my dad was, and I said, "Oh, he died in the war." And I didn't. I was too little to even understand that the war had been over for 5 years before I was even born, or 6 years. And I didn't know about the Korean War. I would have glommed onto that one, but it was rare. But it was bad. And then when she remarried, it wasn't a whole lot better. I mean, it just fights almost every night, and by that I don't mean arguments. I mean fights, oftentimes very physical.
Where are you in the order of children?
I had an older brother, and then there was a large gap between me and my half siblings of, I think, 10 years or something. Well, yeah, it would have been right after they got married. But there were a couple of times when the fights actually involved firearms. So the fights the kids heard, and it was the sort of thing where I never brought friends home. No, never, no, certainly not sleepovers. It was just the situation was just too, at best, embarrassing, and at worst, pretty traumatic. So
Were you trying to just kind of stay under the radar to all that, or?
yeah, yeah. I had my grandparents were very devout, and they had made a point of always coming by and picking up my brother and I and taking us to Sunday school. We went to Church of Christ every Sunday during that time. So I got a foundation, kind of like what you would get at parochial school. I got that in Sunday school, and I got what I would say a working understanding of the Bible, but it was it was all head knowledge. There was never anything that actually took from it, because a lot of that was about the externals. That was kind of the emphasis of it, and either doing the right thing or believing the right thing, and by that meaning having the right T's crossed and the I's dotted, not so much about what you believed in your heart, but just what you believe in your head. So that was kind of the foundation, and that kind of went all the way up through maybe the beginning of middle school, middle of middle school, when my interest started shifting, and I was more interested in trying to be accepted and to be cool and that sort of thing. In I think it was my junior year in high school, I started dating a gal whose parents, her whole family was pretty stomped down, hope to die, all the way full on Pentecostals. I mean, they were. If for those of you that have any kind of understanding of Church of Christ and Pentecostals, there's no greater understanding of whiplash than what I went through with that. And they were, this boy ain't never seen nothing like what I'd seen in Pentecostal church, and it was all brand new to me. And yeah, then when I would go and talk to it was my girlfriend's grandmother, and
Were there snakes?
They were somewhere. I don't think they ever saw them bring them out, but
It was that kind of level.
It was that. Yeah, it was. I mean, when you go to church on Sunday night, they literally did not believe that they started having church until everybody was rolling on the floor. It was very extreme, but and in the Church of Christ, I mean, it was just very, very proper, very structured, very the same way every week, and so it was crazy, kind of like I said, whiplash. But then they showed me in the Bible, they showed me 1 Corinthians 12, where it starts talking about these spiritual gifts and speaking in tongues and everything. And I thought, Church of Christ done been lying to me all these years. And so there was a somewhat of an attraction to it. But the attraction was, it's kind of hard to separate and to parse it out, but there was somewhat of that drawing spiritually, but at the same time, we found out pretty early on in our dating relationship that the more we went to church, the more freedoms that her parents would give us, and the less restrictions they'd have on us. And so as we would go to church, and then afterwards we would go to the park and make out and do a lot of things that we weren't supposed to be doing. And so somewhere within that, like I said, there was kind of a spiritual drawing to it as well. And my senior year of high school, this would have been '69, and I had something happen to me. I mean, there was some kind of an awakening that took place. For lack of a better word, even today I don't know quite how to categorize it, but I ended up responding to an altar call, and when you respond to a Pentecostal altar call, you got to be prepared that you're going to get that obligatory bop on the forehead, so, which is the Pentecostal high five, and I mean it was full. I did the whole thing, the full gamut, and I started reading the Bible, and I was praying. I mean, it was my senior year, and I was an assistant manager at a hamburger joint, and I'd drive clear across town, work until the thing closed down. Then I would, shut down the place, and then I'd drive all the way back across town, get home about 11 o'clock, and I would read the Bible and pray every night for about an hour, and get up and go to school at 8 o'clock next morning, and then start that all over again. And I was carrying my Bible with me to school, but I was still, me and my girlfriend were going to the park every chance we had, or any place where we could get an hour of privacy and doing things we shouldn't be doing. And I think that I think I quit drinking during that time, because after all, Christians don't do that sort of thing. So I quit doing that, but I don't know that there was anything else that I quit doing. And looking back on it, I don't know what that motivation, what the impetus was for me to do all that stuff, like when I'd come home at night and spend that hour of quiet time with the Lord, because there was nothing substantive inward about it.
Are you okay? So at this point, looking back on it, are you a Christian?
I don't know.
Including childhood, even.
Yeah. No, I to be honest, I really don't know. If after high school, I pretty quickly discovered drugs, and so I spent most of the '70s, getting high, letting my hair grow, and listening to Led Zeppelin, and that was kind of that's just what I did during the '70s. And if you had asked me at any time during that, if I were to die, where would I spend eternity? I would have said, without batting an eye, in hell. I was
During the '70s.
Yeah, yeah. During that whole period, I had no question whatsoever in my mind. I did not think anything about all of that. Was just stuffed out of my mind. I didn't even think about it again until I became a Christian later.
Quick question on the transition that you
Yeah.
had there. Did you end up having someone compromise and say, like, hey, it's okay for Christians to also do this?
Not at that point.
Okay.
No, that did kind of come later, but during that time, no, I didn't have any context for it at all. The church, the Pentecostal church was all about having church and getting happy, and so there wasn't a whole lot of, even though it was a Pentecostal holiness church, there wasn't a whole lot of holiness in it, so I didn't really have any, like I said, no context for that, but I didn't know anything about grace or any of that sort of thing either. So it wasn't a struggle with me when I started doing when we were doing the fornicating and all that. It just seared consciences is all I can think of. But then after graduating from high school and just kind of diving over full on into hedonism, I just kind of, and some of you have heard me say this, I just kind of figured I would be that guy sitting on a rocking chair when I was 60 years old smoking a doobie, and here I am 72, and that didn't happen, 71, but that didn't happen, but I just thought that was going to be my life from then on. And Sherry and I met, and just like your book title, I won't say where we met, but it wasn't in church. And you know, we started dating a couple of years later, and we were just kind of a couple of broken people. We both come from pretty dysfunctional backgrounds, and we had got sucked into this whole countercultural thing in the 70s, that was supposedly looking for love, and we'd got sucked into that, and we didn't. About the only thing that really took from that, I guess, was the whole so-called sexual revolution that our generation started, and so she got pregnant pretty early on, and I can be honest with you, the very last thing that I wanted to do was get married, and I was hoping in my own heart, I was hoping that she would offer, make the suggestion if I wanted her to get an abortion, and if she did, I was going to be very willing. I say, sure, I'll pay for it, I'll cover all that. I was going to be the honorable man, and I was going to pay for it and all that. And but for those of you that have heard her testimony, she had had 3 abortions prior to this, and I was aware of that, and so I wasn't going to ask her to, and I don't know why. Because I just didn't want to. I was just hoping she would, and then I would say okay, but she didn't, and so her dad told us when we told him about it. I had known her dad before I knew her, and because I work construction, and he and I worked together. And when we first started dating, he told her, he said, you can do better than him, and tried to talk her out of dating me. But then a couple weeks later, we go over to his house, and we had the meeting where we had to admit that we were pregnant. And so his response to that was, do the right thing. And so I think in my I don't know that I didn't think things through back in those days. I mean, I would just kind of seat of the pants, just whatever I felt like at the time. So I don't think I was really thinking these thoughts, but they were there in the back of my mind. And so I was thinking, okay, I'll do the right thing, and we'll get married, and then when it's the dust is all settled and everything's kind of the right timing of it, then we'll just quietly get a divorce and we'll go our own separate ways. In fact, my coworkers took bets on whether it would last 6 months or not, and because they knew me, and I wouldn't take the bet because I knew me, and but we got married. And I would just, back up a little bit, because I just would say, in case there's anybody here that has, or anybody that would be watching online or something, that have some sort of, have kind of bought into the typical lie of a woman's reproductive rights kind of thing that you hear the media proclaim today. I was actually in my heart this is my daughter Brandy that we're talking about, okay? And in the stupidity of my just selfish, self-absorbed life back then, I couldn't even think that through. And if I had gotten my will back in 1975, I would have taken the life of my daughter, and so just for that, there's just you guys know my view on the subject, so I don't need to go on that anymore. But we got married, and I suppose you could say we made pretty good roommates. We certainly didn't love each other. We didn't know what love was, Um,
But like even in the beginning, things were not where you would have wanted them to be.
oh no, no, not even no. Uh, we were roommates. You know, you've heard the idiom of the two ships passing, and I think that was probably us on the best days. But you know, we coexisted, and you know, Brandy was born, and
How old were you when you guys got married?
75, 24,
Okay.
23, 24. And so we've been married a while, a year or so. Brandy was a baby, and 4 or 5 months old. And I came home from work one night, and like I said, my grandmother was very devout. She I can still remember her car pulling up out front every Sunday morning to pick us up for Sunday school. And I came home from work one night, and Sherry met me at the door. And I apologize to you that have heard this, but she met me at the door, and she said, would it affect our relationship if I were to get religious? And my first response to her was, you've been talking to my grandmother. And she had, actually. She had been talking to her. And then my second response was, no, of course not, as long as you don't try to change me. And she said, oh, I would never do that. And so she did. She got religious. And we started going to this little kind of a sleepy church, very denominational.
We?
Yeah. I just, in my compromise of, okay, if you don't try to change me, because I'm just going to be the guy I am, I didn't mind going to church with her. You know, she wanted to sing in the choir. So it was a little church. I mean, we're talking little church. On Easter Sunday, they'd have 30, 40 people.
Is this your grandmother's church?
No, no, I wouldn't go to Church of Christ
Okay.
after then. And this is, please, if anybody's Church of Christ, I just, like you were saying about Catholicism, I'm not trying to cast any aspersions on it, but that just wasn't me. But we were going to this church, and I just kind of figured, well, you know, I'll smoke a joint, and I could enjoy any situation then. So I would. She wanted to sing in the choir, which, you know, the choir consisted of a majority of the people in attendance in the church, and then I would watch. They weren't big enough to have a nursery at that point, so I would watch Brandy, and that was kind of our arrangement, and it worked okay. For a while, but as time went by, this particular church, they like the Church of Christ, they did communion every week, and they had the aisles like we do. They just didn't have the people to fill the parts in between. But they needed the same amount of people to serve communion as they did if they did have the parts in between filled. And so they would oftentimes ask me if I wouldn't mind filling in. And you know, I had the technology to pass out some bread and juice, so I was fine with doing that. It didn't bother. You know, my whole thing from the very beginning when we first started going is, as long as people, you know, I'm not going to put on any kind of airs. I'm not going to try to act like somebody I'm not. This is who I am. I'm this long-haired, dope smoking, Led Zeppelin listening to guy, you know. And so that was kind of my thing. And I thought, and so they'd asked me to help with the communion, and I did, and didn't mind. But then a few months go by, and got a call from one of the elders at the church, and he asked if he could come over. And so we said, yeah, and he came over, and he started explaining to me. He kind of hemmed and hawed around a little bit, and he said, you know, according to our bylaws, in order to pass out the communion elements, you have to be a deacon in the church. And I said, you know, okay, no offense taken. You know, it's fine. You know, I mean, I understand, Jerry, and if I can't pass out communion, I can't pass out communion. And he goes, oh, no, you don't understand. We're asking you to become a deacon. And I said to him, I said, look at this. Does this look like deacon material to you? And he said, Ken, Christians aren't perfect, they're just forgiven. And I thought maybe that was a verse from the Bible, and so I thought, he's an elder. He knows that stuff better than I do, so maybe I am okay. Maybe it is okay for me to continue to be like this. And so I'm kind of like, all right, that's cool. And so I became a deacon in this church. And a couple of months went by, and he came up to me after church one time, and he says, Ken, we missed you at the board meeting last night. And I said, board meeting? And he said, yeah, in our church, if you're a deacon, you're part of the board. And so you need to come to the board meetings now. And I thought, oh, wow, okay. And it was about the same time, there was another one of the elders. We were in the kitchen. Sherry and I were, no, Sherry was in the kitchen, and one of the elders had come in, and he was trying to talk her into teaching the high school group, and she was telling him that she needed someone to teach her, that she wasn't, she didn't have enough Bible understanding to be able to do that. And he's trying to explain to her, oh no, it's all right here in the material. All you have to do is just read the material, and then you can teach it. It's all fine. I walked in kind of at the end of the conversation, and for some reason, probably because I didn't have a clear mind at the time, but for some reason I was thinking that he was asking her to fill in for him while they went on vacation the next Sunday. And so I said, Charlie, I can do it. And he said, fine. And he picked up a stack of curriculum like this and handed it to me. And in those 3 words, I can do it, I all of a sudden became the junior high and high school Sunday school teacher, which in this church meant you were the junior high and high school youth leader. So in just a matter of a few weeks, I went from being this me to being a deacon and being a member of the board and being the youth leader of this church. And all this time I'm thinking, I thought I was not going to put on any kind of airs about who I was, and I don't know where that all came from. And so
You were still like being you, right?
I was still being me, yes, totally.
I mean, like transparently to the people in the church?
I guess. I mean, I didn't,
like no flaunting
I didn't smoke cigarettes
right.
in the middle of the sanctuary or anything, but to my knowledge, that's what I was doing. I mean, I certainly wasn't hiding anything. So some time goes on, and I'm just thinking, okay, well, maybe what God wants for this little teeny tiny youth group and this little teeny tiny church is somebody that's as cool as I am to reach these kids, and minister to them, or whatever I was thinking. I don't know, but some time went by, and God was really convicting me about this duplicity in my life, and I was under a lot of conviction, but I had a God, and it was shaped like a joint, and I wasn't going to give it up for another God. And at the same time when that was going on, if you go back to the time when Sherry met me at the door and asked me if she could get religious, and that's really what she did. That's kind of what the church taught, and so that's what she did, because there was no discipleship or anything like that. They just had a Sunday morning service, and that was it. And there was no teaching. But when I said, as long as you don't try to change me, and she said, oh, I would never do that, she lied. I mean, my wife is very honest, but she lied about that, because as the time went on, especially as, here I was, this deacon, board member, Sunday school teacher, youth leader, and still living the same way I had been for the last 12 years of my life. And it was causing friction between us because she had kind of left that behind. You know, her way of getting religious was to start becoming moral, and she had quit drugs, and she was not wanting to raise Brandy the same way that we had been raised, and so she would, you know, even do a Bible story and a bedtime prayer and things like that. But my lifestyle was causing a lot of friction between the two of us, and the more that she would kind of bring that up to me of how I was living, the more I would kind of dig my heels in to not change. And so this is causing a lot of friction between us as well. So I was just really messed up internally, and I took the youth to a concert, Christian concert, one night. And I'm not gonna tell you who, because that guy was a fake too, but and I don't want to promote him. But after the concert, he started giving the altar call, and people started responding, and he started doing the altar call more. And I have to, I would confess that if I was going to be honest, I don't know how many times I heard the gospel growing up. It had to have been over 100 times. You know, being raised in the Church of Christ and going to this other church with the pastor was pretty cool. He would do a gospel presentation every Sunday. But he was 187, and for me, I didn't quite relate. But I don't. He was a really cool guy. But for some reason, I heard the gospel for the first time that night. I probably could have presented the gospel, and yet I'd never heard it before, if you know what I'm saying. That night, I heard the gospel. But I didn't want to give up my God, so I was resisting. I mean, I brought every bit of my fortitude to play into saying no to what God was doing on the inside, and I think it's. I think it was then, I'm not sure, but it's kind of like he showed me that my God wasn't weed, it was me. And that's what I didn't want to give up. I didn't want to give up me. But I don't know what it was beyond just simply coming to a place where if you've ever heard the cliche, your arms are too short to box with God, I got tired of doing this. And so I just I said, okay, I give up. You got me. And I just there was a lot of struggle that went on after that with quitting the drugs and everything that comes. That I don't need to go into to that, but you would think that. It would have been happily ever after then. I got saved. I came home, and Sherry, there was a gal in the church that was a pretty spiritual gal, and she had told Sherry that, it's not your job to be the spiritual leader. It's really your husband's job. And so Sherry had been trying to get me to be the one that do the bedtime prayers and read the Bible story and stuff, and I was like, nah, you're better at it than I am. But I came home and I wanted to do that. Now, okay, I'm going to be the spiritual leader. And I don't know how to say it anymore other than I didn't know how to be a spiritual leader. And Sherry didn't know how to be a spiritual follower. And so it's not that I was being mean and demanding and, the Bible says you're going to submit to me. It wasn't that. It was just stupid. I was just being an idiot about it, and And the problem with it was that we both thought that's what we wanted, and yet I was doing it wrong, and so she kind of I just kind of grabbed this spiritual rug and yanked it out from under her and told her, I'm going to be the spiritual leader now, so if you got any questions for God, let me know what they are, and then I'll take them to him and I'll get back with you, is kind of my whole approach to it. And I thought that's what I was supposed to do, and so did she, and she inwardly rebelled against that, and didn't know why, because she thought that's what she wanted too, and so she went through this big tailspin, and of our the first 7 years of our marriage were, like I said, at best roommates. They were tolerable, but the 8th year was rough. The first year of my Christianity was the worst year of our marriage, and
Hold on, I got a question. And
Yeah.
this should be a treat for you guys because I've actually never heard this before. We never talked about after the concert. You come home to your wife. Do you tell her what happened?
Oh yeah. I said, guess what happened to me tonight? I got saved. And what I didn't know though is that she had spent the night. Her brother was worse than me, and she just spent the day with their cousin. Her brother, earlier in that week, he had tried to, in Wichita they have this thing they call the canal route, which is basically like Broadway extension, but it's elevated, and he had tried to take his big old Ford, whatever the big Ford Limited, and tried to drive it off the side of the canal route to commit suicide because his girlfriend broke up with him, and he had a really over the top drug and alcohol problem, and she had called the police about trying to, he's a danger to himself, and he needs to get committed, and she'd called a couple of detox places, and they said the only way we can do it is if he is either willing to come in or he's unconscious. He's not. He can't. If he says no, we can't do anything. So his cousin took him out in the alley with a bottle of tequila and got him drunk, so he would pass out. And that was. And so Sherry had been dealing with that all day long. And when he came to in the hospital, the first thing he saw was her, and he realized he was tied down to this gurney. And so he was calling her all kinds of names and everything. And so I came home and I said, "Hi, honey, I got saved today." And she was like, "Oh, that's nice," and that was the beginning of our Christian relationship together. And I didn't know how to react to that. She didn't know how to react to me, and it was we were very insensitive to the other's needs, and I thought, because I had this understanding of the Bible stories that I've been taught growing up, I thought that somehow once I put the template of Jesus over the top of that made me a spiritual man. But instead I was extremely prideful. Instead of that translating into some sort of spirituality, it translated into very prideful. And because I thought that I was God's, I thought God was really, he probably figured he had a really good day the day I got saved. I mean, he probably went home saying, "Boy, this was a good day today," because I just thought that he would be so happy to have somebody like me on his team, and what a benefit I would be for him. And so that year that we had of trying to figure out how to get our spiritual legs under us was primarily by me coming to that place of realizing that, you know what, I'm just as stupid as I was before I got saved. Only now I got spiritual pride on top of that stupidity. And so there was a lot of humbling that the Lord had to do, and I mean the story of how he I can do this story. So we were going to the church, same church, and they had an interim pastor who today he's a pastor down in the DFW area, and we've kept tabs these years. Good friend of mine, really good guy, and he was about our age, and he was he was the first real Christian that was our age that I had ever met, and I had started when we were going to church, and I had kind of gotten, well, I'm dealing with my spiritual pride and everything, and just kind of wondering why. Well, God, I've done everything you wanted to do. I gave up drugs, I gave up all this sort of stuff, and now I'm being a good husband. And why aren't you making her be better? And I started kind of fashioning my life in such a way. I mean, I wasn't worried about whether I was praying on the right knee or the left knee. If I was praying on the wrong knee, because I was praying on both of them, because I was going to be so spiritual, and I was going to have all of my gospel ducks in a row, that God would have no choice but to get Sherry's attention and turn her around. That was kind of the way I was doing, and so I was. That became my motivation for serving him, was to make him do the thing that I wanted him to do with the marriage. And we were in church this one Sunday, and the Pastor Gary got up, and he was talking about the different reasons why people serve God. And he says, some people serve God because they come to church and there's good professional contacts, and some people serve God because they have a substance abuse. They need to get, they want to get victory. And he goes through a whole list of different things of why people serve God. And then he said, and some people serve God in order to get their marriage fixed up. And when he got to that one, that kind of got my attention. And I said, yeah, that's me. What's your point? And he said, but there's only one reason to serve God, and that's because God is worthy to be served. And I'd never thought that. Like I said, I take you back to the point where I said I didn't think things through, and I'd never thought that part of it through yet. And there was in the back of my mind, I had my default in case God didn't fix up the marriage, was I could go back to being a stoner, because then I didn't care. I could just go back and get high, and then I didn't care whether things were okay or not. And I don't, like I said, I don't really think I ever thought that in so many words, but I did think it. It was in my heart. And so when Gary said those words to me that day, it was just like, and so I went home. As was typical of that time, we had a big fight, probably about the sermon. I don't remember what it was, but Sherry's prayer closet has always been outside, and she got home, she took her Bible, and she went to the park, which is kind of what she always liked to do, and so I went into the bedroom, and I was with my Bible, and I was praying, and I for the first time, I mean, this is after being a Christian for probably about a year at this point, but for the first time, I really came clean with him, and I guess that was probably the time when he realized, he caused me to realize that, okay, I thought my God was weed, but it really is me, and I said, okay, Lord, I think I've walked with you long enough to know, and I've walked with me even longer, and I know better than to make any promises to you, because I know better than that. But I just want to say that it is, as much as I know how to do this, I want to lay this all down. I mean, I certainly lay down any plan B. But I also want to lay down the marriage. I want to lay down Sherry. I want to lay down my life, and I just want to. You died on the cross for me. For no, as Christian was saying, for no other reason other than your love, and even with all of my junk, you still loved me, and you did that. And even in the way that I've misrepresented you as a Christian, you in all the years of hypocrisy that I had in that other church, you still loved me. And so I lay this all down, and I just, as with all that's within me, as much as I know how to, I want from here on out, I just want it to be you and me. And what I didn't know is that while Sherry was sitting underneath the elm tree over in Riverside Park, he was doing the same thing with her. And so she came back, and we, kissed and made up, and we've been happily ever after. But about that same time, we started going to Calvary Chapel. Right about the time that we kind of came to this place of realizing, like, we got to let God do this and quit trying to do it ourselves. And we started going to Calvary Chapel, and at first it was just kind of, started getting involved there, and the church was all younger, and we were younger, and that was kind of cool, and it started bringing my serving God with my construction skills. We're this very old building that we were fixing up and stuff, and from there I just started getting involved in a few other things, and started teaching a few Bible studies. Then about 80, that was 82, and then about 86 they asked me to go on staff as an interim pastor. In 88 they ordained me, and then at the end of 1990 is when we felt the Lord calling us to come here.
That's the conclusion?
No, because there's a thing on there that you're supposed to ask me about trials and God's grace and stuff. There was a group, this will be quick. There was a group of people that had been involved in some other Calvary chapels that were living here, and they'd contacted the church up there in Wichita asking us if there was ever any plans to come and start a Calvary. And so when we were feeling that call to here, I called one of them and said, can get these other guys together and we'll have a meeting. And so we had a meeting where Theodore left. He was actually at that meeting, and everybody's all excited about, yes, we're going to do Calvary Chapel. And so we did, and there were 5 or 6 families, I think, in the beginning that were from other Calvaries. But within we had a really good time for 7, 8 months, something like that, and really good, sweet honeymoon period. But then I started hearing things like, there were comments like, well, Chuck always does it this way, and Greg never does it that way. And there was a lot of just a lot of dissatisfaction because we weren't doing things the way that they, we didn't know how to do Calvary Chapel because that was not like their experience. And so within the first 8 months, all of those families had left except for Theodore's parents, the guy that was asking the questions over here earlier. His parents was with us for a long time. But I'd like to say that I handled all that well, but I didn't. But I could say that the people that were upset with me handled it worse. They really didn't handle it very well. And but the grace in all of that has been that whenever we've experienced those kind of hiccups, that was kind of like, okay, your first year lesson is like, it really hurts when people leave the church. But it's really sweet when people stick with you through thick and thin. Mm-hmm. So that was a good lesson to learn early on, and so here we are 3 decades later, and I still, love you guys. So
Questions?
That's my story.
Question is, did your father-in-law ever come around in liking you?
Yeah, and he was not a Christian, and by any stretch. I mean, he was as mad at God as what Christian was, but he. Sherry prayed a prayer for him. I mean, he was mean. He was a mean dad. Said some very, very bad things to her and her siblings as they were growing up. Very mean to his wife. But I remember one time after we became Christians, she was trying to share the gospel with him, and he just started yelling at her, and he says, I was born an Episcopalian, and I'm going to die an Episcopalian, and so you don't need to bring Jesus into this. He was very angry, very mean. He was very well loved down at the bar. Everybody thought he was a good old boy, but he was not that way at home. And so Sherry, in a kind of a desperation prayer one time, we were praying for him, and she just said, Lord, whatever you need to do, please reach out and reveal yourself to my dad. And it was about 2 months later he was diagnosed with cancer that was inoperable, but he got saved, and as a result of that. And I mean, wow, you talk about a change. He lived for about a year after that, but he started coming to Calvary Chapel, and this is, I mean, he was almost my age, and there wasn't anybody in the church that was over 40 at that time, and most of them were in their 20s. But he started coming to the church every week, and even when he was too sick to do anything else, he would still come to church. And not too long back, we were kind of going through some papers and cleaning out some files and stuff, and ran across a letter that he had written to the kids shortly before he died. And I mean, even still, it just brings tears to our eyes when he confesses all of his shortcomings and how grateful he was for God giving him grace in the midst of all of his jerkiness and stuff. But yeah, we became really close friends, especially in the end. I got to preside over his funeral, which was cool.
Other questions?
Everybody's tired because you ate up all the time. Yeah, Levi. Oh, by the way, did we repeat the question? Yeah,
Hey,
I'm
Grandpa.
sorry. Oh, yeah. Congratulations, Uncle. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I'm sorry, I forgot. Amanda's question was, did Sherry's dad, Don, and I did he ever start liking me? And yeah, he did. But Levi's question. No, no. In fact, after we left that church, we were there for about maybe a year after I became a Christian. And Levi's question was during that time we were at the other church before Calvary Chapel, before I was a Christian, did anybody at any point ever ask me if I was a Christian? And no, they didn't. And we were there for about a year before I was really, when I got saved, I was kind of like a bull in a china closet. And so I've kind of figured, did I mention the part about spiritual pride? Yeah, and that was, I figured that God had ordained me to bring this church into spiritual revival, and so I was knocking things over right and left, and I don't think that they were real sorry to see us go because of that, but we started going to Calvary Chapel, and then we went back to visit after. There's two stories I want to say about that. We went back to visit sometime after that, and there was a gal that was kind of like one of she was the wife of one of the elders, kind of one of the matriarchs, main gals in the church. And I was talking to her after the service, and I was explaining to her, I said, back when we were here and we were doing all that stuff, and I was, had, all the things went down the litany, and I said, I wasn't even saved. And she goes, well, at least you were doing something. That's more than most people can say. And it's like that wasn't even concerned that I had been teaching the youth as a pagan dog. But then there was another, about the same time, we were in at the mall, and we'd gone into J.C. Penney's, and I noticed one of the kids from the youth group was there in the men's department. So I went over and started talking to him, as we, this is maybe 2 or 3 years after we left the church, and I was saying the same thing to him. I said, all those years that I was your youth leader, a lot of those times when we did the things, I was high. I'd been smoking pot and everything. And he looked at me and kind of smiled, and he says, "Ken, you think we didn't know that?" And I mean, talk about a knife in my heart, and especially because, to my knowledge, at that time, like I said, this was a few years afterwards, but I don't think any of those kids were serving God. And I just kind of wonder if it was because of that hypocrisy that I lived back then, that I didn't set out, I set out to be just the opposite, but I was not going to be a hypocrite. And then I became the very thing I despised, and so don't be hypocrites. Don't act like you're not somebody you are, but if you're not, be somebody you are. Be somebody you ain't, and let Jesus have the wheel. But yeah, okay. Gabe. When did I become a pastor? I was actually, as I said, I was asked to come on staff. My title originally was intern pastor, which basically means rookie. I was a rookie pastor and wasn't ordained or anything. I was just kind of learning the ministry from the ground up. And that was when I was 35. That was about 86. And then in about 88 is when I got ordained, a couple years later. And then it was, so I was an assistant pastor was my title. And then when we came here in 1990, that's when first time I'd been in as a senior pastor. But I'd been in full-time ministry for almost 5 years by that time. Oh, gosh. Yeah. Yeah, Levi's asking, how do we know what the calling of God looked like? God told me. Really, it would take too long to explain, but it really, for me, Christian can say his part, but for me, it was incremental. It started with me taking my construction tools to the church when they were doing some remodeling. It started then, and it was just kind of like step by step by step, and so there really wasn't any moment where I said, I think I'm going to go be a pastor. It just kind of was I did hear the voice of God at one point, but that's for another time. But it was just kind of an evolution, I guess you will, in my spiritual life, just by starting whatever God wanted me to do, being ready and willing to do that.
So when I became a Christian, I was completely, absolutely all in. Like, it was filled with, like he was saying, immaturity, and especially as a little bit of time went on and I became more knowledgeable, that's where arrogance and pride was really at its worst. But I was really absolutely all in. And so the natural course of my life went into those giftings before I ever knew anything about what a pastor was or anything like that. And just to confuse things a little bit tonight, I think that there were some of those things that were that God had always made me for, that were playing out in my life before I was a Christian, and it was just wrong. It was my advice. It was my thoughts on how to help people and everything like that, because I was really about people. But once I became a Christian, then I felt like I knew truth with that. And I was so compelled. The verse in Jeremiah about this being a fire shut up in my bones, I really identify with that so early in my faith and in my walk. So all I would say is this: forget any offices and titles and everything. The way that the kingdom of God works is just by the power of His Spirit, not by word. And so these things were just playing out probably in both of our lives in the natural course, as the Holy Spirit was enabling and stuff. And
Yeah, and I would just say, kind of in conclusion to that, because I agree full with that. I mean, I can even think back to my Army days when of some of the things God was doing as far as groundwork and stuff. But it's there. Don't ever think that spiritual zeal, and I mean that in the true sense of the word, this desire to serve God, is necessarily an exclusion for spiritual pride, because I mean that's the devil knows how to use that spiritual zeal, and so I think that idea of pride is something that we never fully cast in the rearview mirror. It's something that we have to always be on guard against, because it's in the midst of that spiritual zeal that I think we can sometimes become the most prideful.
so, something else that kind of goes along with all of this, and just a testimony in general. When we say testimony, a lot of times we all understand it as what's the story and how this started, right? But interestingly enough, if we're saying, hey, I was an eyewitness to this thing that happened in court, we're telling the story of what we saw. And so becoming Christians, it's really like, oh, okay, now I can live my whole life sharing what God is continuously, constantly doing, season after season, year after year. The testimony, like I said, this is the how I got here story, right? But the testimony really only starts there. It really only begins there. And then the more we mature, the more we get to tell people not how much I learned when I was studying, the Old Testament and this book and everything, but we get to keep on sharing how God showed up and how God did things that people can't do. So one other thing I thought of with that question that he had asked me earlier about the Catholic Church and if they had shared the gospel with me. The first time I walked into Calvary Chapel, I think I've mentioned this before. They knew who I was. It was like DEFCON 5, red alert. This is the guy who's seeing the pastor's daughter. He's not a believer. Okay, so first time I walk in there, this guy, who's the usher, he goes like this, opens his arms and he goes, Jesus loves you. Now, I got my guard up, right? And I remember thinking, buddy, you're gonna have to dig deeper than that, right? Because I've got a lot of years of Catholic school that I know that. But I was just thinking about this while we were sitting here, and you don't need more than that. There isn't anything that was needed more than that. It didn't matter yet in my life, right? So he got it right from the start. That whole message, that whole Jesus loves you introduction was everything I needed to hear. I just wasn't in the place to hear it at that point, at that time.
Okay, it's late. Why don't you send us home?
Yeah. Lord, we praise you and proclaim you for your stories. We love to hear them. We love to learn more about the full spectrum of your grace, the way that you do things that we just would not script, the way that you work outside of our abilities and things that would even make sense to us. And we thank you for your faithfulness, your protection, your love. We want to pray for all these things that we've been talking about tonight for these young ones, for the marriages in this building, for the future of where you would have your family, your saints, to continue in your grace and your love. We thank you and we give you all the praise and all the glory for your story and your desire, your mission. In Jesus' name, amen.
Hey, thank you all. Have a good evening. Thanks for coming. Oh. Christmas party Friday night, 7 o'clock. Bring a snack and a covered or a wrapped gift. Every participant that wants to play, bring a wrapped gift, $10 or less. All right?